The boardroom fell silent when Victor slammed the folder onto the mahogany table. Inside were documents he had worked on for 2 years, a merger deal that could save the company and his career. But before he could speak, his mentor, the man he had trusted like a father, slid the same folder toward the CEO with his own name on it. No acknowledgement of Victor's work. No credit. No warning. Just a stolen victory, delivered with a smug smile. Victor's blood ran cold. In that instant, humiliation scorched deeper than any wound. He didn't just lose his idea. He lost his reputation, his promotion, and every ounce of respect he had earned. That day, as polite applause filled the room for another man's triumph, Victor decided, "I will burn everything you love." Victor wasn't impulsive. Revenge wasn't going to be loud or messy, not yet. He wanted precision. Tom would be his weapon. He began gathering pieces of his former mentor's life like fragments of a puzzle. His name was Richard Carraway. Celebrated businessman, family man, philanthropist. The man smiled on magazine covers, shook hands with politicians, and hosted charity dinners. But Victor saw through the image. He knew arrogance was hiding under all that polish. Late nights became research missions. Old colleagues whispered stories about unpaid debts, mistreated employees, and quiet scandals buried under expensive lawyers. Victor documented everything. Every shady deal. Every betrayal. He built his new career in another city, silently amassing wealth and influence. On the surface, he was thriving. Inside, the fire burned hotter with each passing year. Friends thought he had moved on. But at night, he sat in the dark, rehearsing the moment he'd look Richard in the eye and destroy him piece by piece. The first strike came quietly, a leaked financial discrepancy in one of Richard's companies. Nothing criminal, just enough to make investors nervous. Then an anonymous tip reached a journalist about questionable hiring practices. Rumors started swirling. A few of Richard's allies distanced themselves. Victor felt satisfaction bloom in his chest. It wasn't enough. Not yet. The man had taken his pride in public. Victor would return the favor tenfold. 5 years after that day in the boardroom, Victor was ready. He'd orchestrated the perfect setup, a charity gala that Richard himself had organized. The guest list was packed with the city's elite. Victor arrived in a black suit, every detail of the night carefully calculated. Halfway through the evening, Victor's contact in the press released the bombshell. A full exposé linking Richard to fraud, offshore accounts, and years of exploitation masked as philanthropy. The crowd's admiration shifted into shock, then disgust. Richard's wife stood frozen, her champagne glass trembling. His son, barely 19, looked like the floor had been ripped out from under him. Victor had expected joy. He dreamed of watching Richard's empire crumble, of seeing him stand there powerless. But instead, an unexpected heaviness filled him. Because in Richard's eyes, Victor saw not fear, but emptiness. And in that moment, he realized something brutal. The man had never valued anything enough to truly lose it. The applause that had once humiliated Victor was gone, replaced by whispers and judgment. Richard walked out without a fight. The empire fell within weeks. Victor had won. But victory felt hollow. The fire that had driven him for years had nothing left to burn, and in its absence, only ash remained. He had built his life around a single purpose, and now that purpose was gone. The cost? Years he would never get back, relationships neglected, and the quiet realization that destroying someone hadn't rebuilt him. In the weeks following Richard's public fall, Victor became a silent celebrity in certain circles. The same journalists who'd published the exposé reached out for anonymous comments. Business rivals congratulated him discreetly, assuming he was behind the downfall, though none dared say it outright. On paper, Victor was untouchable. He owned properties, stocks, and companies. His influence reached boardrooms Richard once dominated. But when the champagne bottles popped in his penthouse, the room felt empty. The faces at his celebrations were business associates, not friends. They laughed loudly, but none of them knew the quiet hunger that had driven him all these years, and none of them cared. One night, Victor returned home from yet another dinner party and found himself staring at his reflection in the mirror. His suit was perfect, his tie immaculate, but his eyes looked like Richard's had that night at the gala, empty. The thought punched him harder than he expected. But Victor wasn't ready to stop. If the man himself didn't feel the weight of the loss, then Victor would make sure his legacy did. He turned his focus to Richard's family. The son, Nathan Carraway, was trying to salvage his father's name. Victor made a few quiet calls, ensuring Nathan's job offers vanished one by one. Every investment Nathan touched crumbled, all thanks to information Victor fed to the right people. Soon, the Carraway name was radioactive. No one wanted to be associated with them. Richard had lost his empire. Now, his bloodline would inherit nothing but dust. Victor's final plan came 2 years later. Richard, now a shadow of the man he once was, lived in a modest apartment on the edge of the city. Rumor had it he'd sold off his last remaining assets to pay legal fees. Victor arranged a meeting through a false pretense, a potential investor who wanted Richard's advice. When Richard arrived, thin and gray-haired, he froze the moment he saw Victor waiting in the private lounge. Neither spoke for a long moment. Victor let the silence stretch, savoring the tension. "You took something from me once," Victor finally said. "I've taken everything from you in return." Richard didn't deny it. He didn't plead. He simply leaned back and said, "Then we're the same." The words hit harder than Victor expected. Because as much as he wanted to reject them, a part of him knew they were true. Richard had stolen his work for power. Victor had stolen Richard's life for satisfaction. And in the end, both men had nothing but ruins. Victor stood to leave, victory tasting bitter in his mouth. As he walked out, he caught his own reflection in the darkened glass. For a split second, it wasn't Richard's face he saw as the enemy, it was his own. That night, Victor sat in his high-rise apartment overlooking the city lights, realizing the war he'd fought was never really about Richard. It had been about proving something to himself, something he still hadn't found. He had won every battle, yet the victory was hollow. The revenge that once burned like fire now felt like a cold, endless night. Moral of the story: revenge can destroy your enemies, but it will also strip you of yourself, until all that's left is the darkness you carried.